Before the name Jeffrey Epstein became a symbol of one of the most disturbing scandals in modern history, he was a ghost. There were no viral headlines, no public scrutiny, no understanding of who he was or the power he held. For years, Epstein moved silently through elite circles, private jets, sprawling estates, exclusive parties, all without attracting serious attention. It would take decades for the world to start asking how one man could gain such extraordinary access to wealth, power, and protection. This story is based entirely on court records, federal filings, sworn testimony, and reporting from established investigative journalists. It does not speculate. It does not accuse anyone beyond what has been legally established. The relationships mentioned are documented associations, not allegations of wrongdoing. This is the verified story of how a little-known financier became the center of a global scandal and how multiple systems failed to stop him. Jeffrey Edward Epstein was born in 1953 in Brooklyn, New York. His early life gave no hint of the dark headlines he would later create. He grew up in a modest home and attended public schools. Those who knew him then described him as intelligent, especially with numbers and analytics. He later attended Cooper Union and New York University, but academic records show he never earned a degree from either. Despite this, he had a powerful talent for presenting himself as highly capable and incredibly well-connected, a skill that would define his entire future. In the mid-1970s, Epstein landed a teaching job at the Dalton School in Manhattan, one of the country's most prestigious private schools. Dalton educated the children of powerful families from finance, industry, and public life. He taught math and science. Former colleagues later described him as confident, unconventional, and deeply ambitious. His teaching style stood out, but so did his desire to move beyond the classroom. His time at Dalton was short. Counts differ on why he left, but by the late 1970s, he had made a huge leap into a completely different world: Wall Street. He joined the major firm Bear Stearns. His path there was strange. He didn't have the usual credentials for high-level finance, and there's no clear public record of him making any major deals. Yet, he managed to position himself close to powerful people and vast sums of money. These connections proved far more valuable than any formal qualifications. By the late 1980s, Epstein had rebranded himself as a private financial advisor, working only for the ultra-wealthy. Unlike traditional money managers, he operated in almost total secrecy. His client lists were never disclosed. His investment strategies were never made public. His business was practically invisible. At the time, this lack of transparency didn't raise red flags. In elite circles, discretion was often seen as a strength. One documented relationship, however, dramatically changed everything for him: his association with Leslie Wexner, the billionaire founder of L Brands. Court records and financial documents confirm that Epstein became deeply involved in managing Wexner's massive fortune. At one point, Epstein was even granted power of attorney, an incredible level of trust. Through this relationship, Epstein gained control over huge assets, including a massive Manhattan townhouse, later described as one of the largest private residences in New York City. Wexner has since stated publicly that he cut ties with Epstein after learning of concerning behavior. He has denied any knowledge of criminal activity, and no charges have ever been filed against him. But what's not disputed is the impact this relationship had on Epstein's status. His access exploded. His influence grew. His protection intensified. Epstein began hosting private gatherings attended by prominent figures from finance, politics, science, and culture. He donated millions to major universities and funded scientific research. He surrounded himself with respected institutions, building a reputation that deflected suspicion. To the outside world, he just seemed like a rich, eccentric financier with unusual connections, nothing that suggested serious criminal conduct. But privately, a different pattern was taking shape. By the early 2000s, Epstein owned luxury homes in New York, Florida, New Mexico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. He traveled constantly, moving between different jurisdictions. This mobility would later make it much harder for law enforcement to track and hold him accountable. It was in Palm Beach, Florida, that the first formal alarm bells were finally rung. Locals started noticing strange things. Individuals were seen visiting Epstein's residence under unusual circumstances. There were reports of cash payments. The timing of these visits drew attention. At first, these were just whispers. That all changed in 2005. A parent contacted the Palm Beach Police Department and reported that her child had been paid by Epstein in connection with inappropriate conduct. This was a formal complaint submitted directly to law enforcement. Police opened an investigation. According to official reports, investigators quickly found a consistent pattern described by multiple individuals. They reported being recruited under false pretenses, receiving cash payments, and experiencing illegal conduct, all later described in sworn statements and official findings. Some stated they were encouraged to bring others into the fold, creating a repeating cycle. These accounts were formally documented. Statements were recorded. Evidence was gathered. Detectives compiled a huge report recommending serious criminal charges. By 2006, Palm Beach police formally sent the case for prosecution. From their perspective, the evidence was overwhelming. But the legal process did not go as expected. Instead of proceeding through state courts, the case shifted into federal jurisdiction. Negotiations took place behind closed doors between Epstein's high-powered legal team and federal prosecutors. In 2008, the outcome sent shockwaves through the community. Jeffrey Epstein entered into a non-prosecution agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Florida. Toward this deal, he pleaded guilty to lesser state-level offenses. He was sentenced to 18 months in county custody, but served only about 13. During that time, he was granted work release privileges, allowing him to leave custody for hours every day. Federal charges were never filed. Most controversially, the agreement secretly protected unnamed individuals from future prosecution. Those who had bravely come forward were never informed of this deal, a violation a federal court later acknowledged. At the time, however, Epstein avoided federal prison and returned to his life with few restrictions. He had to register as a sex offender, but the vast network described by investigators was never examined in court. The message seemed clear. Epstein had faced the justice system, but only barely. After his release, he resumed his international travel and kept control of his properties. While some institutions cut ties, many did not. His social standing remained mostly intact. This period is critical because civil lawsuits later alleged that his criminal conduct continued even after his conviction. It was also during this time that Ghislaine Maxwell became a central figure. Maxwell, a British socialite and daughter of media tycoon Robert Maxwell, was constantly seen with Epstein. According to later federal court findings, she played a direct role in recruiting individuals, coordinating logistics, and maintaining Epstein's abusive environment. This is not speculation. It is established by law. In 2021, a federal jury convicted Ghislaine Maxwell on multiple criminal counts. She was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Her conviction remains one of the few moments of real accountability in this entire saga. Those who came forward described a highly organized system. Recruitment followed predictable patterns. Payments were standardized. Silence was enforced through money, legal agreements, and the fear of challenging someone so powerful. Epstein's wealth created a fortress around him. His lawyers negotiated settlements. Confidentiality agreements silenced accusers. The complexity of different jurisdictions delayed justice. But perhaps most importantly, his reputation shielded him. Many people assume that someone with such powerful friends could impossibly be involved in serious wrongdoing, or that confronting him would bring severe consequences. For years, the case faded from national attention. It was seen as a troubling, but closed, legal matter. That all changed when journalists revisited the 2008 plea deal and started asking tough questions. Why was the agreement so lenient? Why were key parties left in the dark? Who approved this deal? And who benefited from Epstein's silence? These questions ignited a national reckoning. By the late 2010s, public pressure was mounting. Survivors spoke out publicly. Investigative reporters connected long-ignored pieces of evidence. Legal advocates challenged the plea deal in federal court. Then, in July 2019, federal prosecutors in New York arrested Jeffrey Epstein on new charges. For the first time, he faced a real possibility of a full public trial. What happened next would stun the world and ensure that the Epstein case would remain unresolved, controversial, and deeply unsettling. The summer of 2019 brought Jeffrey Epstein back into the public eye with unprecedented attention. This arrest marked a major turning point in a story that had remained largely behind closed doors for over a decade. The 2019 indictment outlined documented patterns of misconduct across Epstein's properties, including locations in Manhattan, New Mexico, Florida, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Travel records and property use logs were presented as key evidence in the case. Investigators meticulously mapped the operations, showing how the properties and resources were used in documented activities. One of the most notable aspects of the case was the renewed scrutiny of Epstein's high-profile associations. His decades-long professional relationship with Leslie Wexner, the founder of L Brands, received extensive attention. Court filings confirmed Epstein's role in managing Wexner's financial assets, including oversight of specific holdings and properties. This historical association, however, illustrates the level of trust and access Epstein had managed to achieve. Verified records show meetings, event attendance, and correspondence. Following Epstein's death in August 2019, the legal narrative shifted dramatically. His death ended the possibility of a criminal trial for him personally. But it did not halt ongoing legal actions involving his estate, financial holdings, and associates. Verified civil suits and asset recoveries proceeded under federal supervision. The 2019 arrest also created a permanent record of Epstein's documented global influence. Verified filings and reporting show the sheer breadth of his interactions with institutions, his property holdings, and high-profile individuals. These details are critical for understanding the challenges faced by federal authorities in pursuing accountability. Analysts, journalists, and legal experts examined court filings, financial records, and property documents to map his connections. Verified interactions with prominent individuals became part of the historical record, providing context for the scale of his operations without implying wrongdoing beyond what has been legally confirmed. By the end of 2019, the Epstein case had evolved from a local investigation to a global narrative. The arrest and legal scrutiny exposed the complexity of managing cases involving individuals with extensive influence, documented resources, and international ties. The proceedings highlighted the importance of verified evidence, the role of federal authorities, and the influence of investigative journalism. This second chapter sets the stage for the final part of our story, examining ongoing investigations, media coverage, legal outcomes, and unresolved questions. It also reinforces a key lesson that even extensive social, financial, and professional networks cannot fully shield documented unlawful operations from federal review when evidence is properly collected and presented. After Jeffrey Epstein's death, the world moved quickly. Press conferences were held, investigations were announced, statements were issued, officials promised transparency. The Metropolitan Correctional Center faced scrutiny. Guards were questioned. Protocol failures were acknowledged. But for the victims, time seemed to slow down. Many had waited years, sometimes decades, for a courtroom where their experiences would be examined under oath, where evidence would be tested publicly, where accountability would be forced into the open. That moment never came. Epstein's death did not end the case legally, but it changed its shape completely. Without a defendant, there would be no criminal trial, no cross-examination, no forced testimony about finances, networks, or decision-making. Whatever Epstein knew about his own operation, and about the people who moved through his world would remain largely undocumented. For survivors, this was not closure. It was another ending decided without them. Federal authorities continued investigating, but the scope narrowed. The focus shifted toward civil litigation and institutional accountability. Courts began unsealing documents connected to Epstein's past lawsuits, including depositions, emails, and exhibits that had remained sealed for years. Each release brought renewed attention. Names appeared. Connections resurfaced. Public debate intensified. Judges repeatedly emphasized that documents were not verdicts, that allegations in civil cases were not findings of guilt. That the legal standard for inclusion in a filing was far lower than the standard required for criminal conviction. Still, the unsealed records confirmed something undeniable. Epstein's world was crowded. He was not isolated. He was not operating on the margins. He was embedded within systems that prized prestige, discretion, and access. Universities examined their funding histories. Charities reviewed donations. Social institutions quietly adjusted their associations. Some issued apologies. Others remained silent. At the center of it all were the survivors. Civil lawsuits continued against Epstein's estate. In 2020, a compensation program was established, offering financial settlements to victims without requiring them to testify publicly. Hundreds came forward. Money, however, was not justice. Many survivors spoke openly about what they felt had been taken from them not only by Epstein, but by a system that had repeatedly failed to intervene when intervention was possible. They described reporting abuse and being ignored. They described seeing Epstein return to elite spaces after his 2008 conviction. They described watching institutions look away. And they described something else too. Fear. Not fear of Epstein alone, but fear of the consequences of speaking out against someone so powerful. Fear of legal retaliation. Fear of public disbelief. Fear of being blamed. Those fears were not irrational. They were shaped by history. The 2008 plea deal had shown what could happen when power met prosecution and power won. That deal would later be ruled unlawful in its process, but by then, the damage was irreversible. As attention turned to accountability, another uncomfortable truth emerged. The Epstein case was not unique. It was extreme, yes, but the mechanisms that enabled it, wealth, influence, legal complexity, institutional hesitation, were not rare. They existed wherever power concentrated faster than oversight. Investigative journalists began drawing comparisons to other cases where abuse had been hidden behind prestige. Different contexts, different industries. Same pattern. Access without accountability. Silence mistaken for discretion. Reputation treated as protection. Public outrage surged and faded in cycles. Social media demanded answers. Hashtags spread. Documentaries were announced. Politicians promised reforms. But reform, like justice, moves slowly. Inside courtrooms, legal limitations became clear. Criminal statutes had expired. Evidence chains were incomplete. Witnesses were aging. Memories were contested. The law could only move where it was allowed to move. And so, the Epstein case settled into a strange place, permanently unfinished. Ghislaine Maxwell remained in prison, serving a 20-year sentence. Her conviction confirmed the reality of the trafficking network, but it did not answer every question. Who else knew? Who else enabled? Who else looked away? Those questions lingered, not because of conspiracy, but because of absence. Absence of testimony. Absence of trial. Absence of records that were never created. Government agencies conducted internal reviews. Prosecutors faced criticism. Some careers were affected, others were not. The justice system acknowledged mistakes, but acknowledgement did not undo outcomes. Epstein's estate continued to be dismantled through civil processes. Properties were sold. Assets distributed. The machinery of law worked methodically but quietly. And gradually, public attention shifted. New crises emerged. New scandals dominated headlines. Epstein's name appeared less frequently on front pages, more often in footnotes, documentaries, and academic discussions about systemic failure. But for those who had lived through the abuse, the case never faded. It lived on in their bodies, in their memories, in the knowledge that a public reckoning had been narrowly missed. Years later, one fact remains uncontested. The Epstein case exposed not just a criminal, but a vulnerability. A vulnerability in how systems respond to wealth, in how institutions prioritize reputation, in how justice can be delayed until it becomes impossible. No court ever ruled on the full scope of Epstein's network. No trial ever forced all evidence into daylight. No single document tells the entire story. And that absence is what gives the case its enduring power. Not because it proves something hidden, but because it shows what happens when truth depends on timing. Epstein was arrested late. Investigations were renewed late. Public attention arrived late. And when the moment finally came, the central figure was gone. What remains now is responsibility not to speculate, but to remember accurately. To separate verified facts from rumor. To resist turning victims' experiences into entertainment. To demand better systems without inventing villains beyond the evidence. The Epstein case does not end with certainty. It ends with a warning. A warning about what happens when power outpaces accountability. When silence is rewarded. When justice is delayed until it no longer fits within the law. And perhaps most unsettling of all, it ends with the understanding that nothing supernatural was required for it to happen. Only ordinary failures, repeated quietly. Over many years, the questions remain unanswered, not because they are forbidden, but because the moment to answer them passed. And once it passed, it did not come back. This documentary is intended solely for educational and journalistic purposes. All information presented is drawn from public court records, federal indictments, trial transcripts, sworn testimony, and reporting by established, credible media organizations. Individuals mentioned have not been convicted of crimes unless explicitly stated. The appearance of names in documents, flight logs, or legal filings does not constitute proof of criminal conduct. Allegations discussed are not findings of guilt. This work examines documented events and systemic failures, while respecting the legal presumption of innocence and the experiences of survivors. Thank you for watching.